The morning started like any other, with a quiet city waking up under the soft glow of the rising sun. The streets were gradually filling with people heading to work, buses and cars moving slowly, and the occasional pedestrian hurrying along the sidewalks. Among the flowing traffic, a man was driving steadily in an unmarked vehicle. He was not just any man. He was the director of the FBI. He had spent the early hours at a briefing discussing cases, strategies, and updates on national security. Now he was on his way to another meeting across town, navigating through the familiar traffic patterns. Despite the calmness outside, his mind was constantly alert. Years in law enforcement had trained him to observe details that most people would miss. The subtle changes in behavior of other drivers, the unusual positioning of vehicles, or even the slight hesitations pedestrians made while crossing streets could all be clues to potential risks. Today, though, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. He was focused, calm, and confident as he drove along the main avenue. Suddenly, flashing lights appeared in his rearview mirror. Red and blue lights spun in an unexpected rhythm, accompanied by the distinct wail of a siren. He was immediately aware of the standard procedure: pull over safely, keep hands visible, and comply with the officer's instructions. He signaled and slowed down, moving his vehicle to the side of the road. As the car came to a stop, the officer approached quickly. But this was not a normal stop. In a matter of seconds, the officer drew his firearm and pointed it directly at the FBI director. Time seemed to freeze for a moment. The sun glinted off the officer's badge, and the fear that ran through the director's mind was both intense and precise. He knew that a wrong move could trigger a dangerous outcome. His hands remained firmly on the steering wheel, raised where the officer could see them clearly. His heart raced, but he forced himself to stay calm, breathing steadily, analyzing the situation. The officer's voice was tense, sharp, and demanding. The director raised his voice just enough to be heard, explaining calmly, "I am the director of the FBI. Here is my badge." He reached slowly toward his jacket to display his credentials. The officer took a step back but did not lower the weapon, his eyes scanning the badge with suspicion. Confusion and disbelief hung in the air like a thick fog. Pedestrians who had noticed the incident began to stop and stare, phones already in hand recording the tense encounter. Inside the car, the director's mind raced. How could this happen? He had been in dangerous situations before, but being held at gunpoint by a fellow law enforcement officer was a scenario he had never imagined. His training kicked in automatically. He reminded himself to remain non-threatening, to avoid sudden movements, and to maintain a calm, authoritative tone, while ensuring the officer understood the gravity of pointing a gun at a federal official. He tried to reason with the officer, repeating his identity and position, explaining the situation without raising his voice or showing panic. The officer remained tense, though, the weapon steady in his hands. His own mind was a swirl of uncertainty, doubt, and caution. Perhaps he suspected a threat. Perhaps he had misread a gesture, or perhaps he was simply being overly cautious. In moments like these, even a small misunderstanding could escalate into something dangerous. The director knew that the outcome depended not just on his words but on his demeanor, on projecting calmness and control without intimidating the officer further. The scene drew attention from passing drivers and nearby pedestrians. Some slowed down to watch. Others called emergency services or tried to capture the moment on their phones. Every second felt longer than the last. The director, fully aware of the public presence, maintained his composure. He spoke slowly, repeating himself, making sure that the officer understood that no sudden actions would come from his side. The situation was delicate. A single wrong move could ignite panic or trigger a defensive reaction from the officer. The standoff continued, and the officer eventually spoke into his radio, calling for backup. The voice on the other end responded, the tension of urgency evident. Soon the presence of additional law enforcement personnel would add a new layer to the situation. The director, aware of this, focused on maintaining his calm, ensuring that the story he presented through his words and actions was clear. He was not a threat, and his identity was verified by his badge. As the minutes passed, the director noticed subtle signs in the officer's posture that suggested hesitation, a flicker of doubt. This was his chance to reinforce his position without challenging the authority of the officer. "I am here to cooperate fully," he said. "I understand your caution, Please allow me to show my credentials more clearly. Slowly, with both hands visible, he brought the badge forward. The sunlight reflected off the metal, making it unmistakable. Finally, the officer took a careful step back, eyes still on the director, but a slight relaxation was visible. The radio chatter continued and backup was on the way. The director remained still, alert and calm. He knew that control of the situation was fragile, dependent on patience, clear communication, and mutual recognition of authority. Nearby witnesses continued to watch, some speaking quietly among themselves. A few drivers had slowed down significantly, unsure of what was unfolding but instinctively aware of the gravity. The director realized that public attention could either escalate or help stabilize the situation. The presence of an audience sometimes added pressure, but in this case, it underscored the need for careful handling by both parties. Moments later, the sound of approaching sirens indicated that additional officers were arriving. The new officers quickly assessed the situation, moving with precision. They immediately recognized the FBI director and his credentials, approaching with a balance of caution and authority. The officer holding the gun was asked to step aside for verification, the tension in his posture visibly shifting as reality set in. The immediate danger of misidentification began to fade, replaced by procedural steps to secure the scene and ensure everyone's safety. The director, still composed but relieved, remained in his seat. He knew the experience would leave a lasting impact. Being confronted in such a manner, despite his high-ranking position, highlighted vulnerabilities that even seasoned professionals could face. His thoughts were methodical, reflecting on training, awareness, and the unpredictable nature of real-life interactions between law enforcement officers. Even in a moment of personal risk, he observed the scene, noting what worked, what could have been done differently, and how the presence of clear verification protocols prevented a potential tragedy. As the backup officers confirmed his identity and began communicating with the initial officer, the tension slowly lifted. The director cooperated fully, answering questions, demonstrating his credentials, and ensuring that the situation would not escalate further. He remained calm and professional, aware that his actions not only affected his own safety, but also set an example for proper behavior under extreme stress. Pedestrians and nearby drivers began to relax, some lowering their phones while others continued to capture the moment. The presence of multiple officers, verification of identity, and calm, controlled communication transformed a potentially dangerous encounter into a scenario that could be managed safely. The director's experience, training, and composure had played a critical role in navigating the situation without incident. In the moments that followed, the initial officer, realizing the gravity of the mistake, began to show signs of relief but also concern. The serious consequences of pointing a firearm at a high-ranking federal official were clear. Procedures for handling such mistakes were immediately put into motion, ensuring accountability and safety for all parties involved. The director, maintaining his professionalism, observed the unfolding resolution, knowing that this incident would likely lead to reviews, policy changes, and broader awareness of identification protocols in law enforcement. By the time the situation began to fully settle, the director had regained a measure of composure. The initial fear, adrenaline, and uncertainty had given way to careful reflection and controlled action. He understood that, despite the intense and potentially dangerous circumstances, his measured response, clear communication, and reliance on training had prevented what could have been a tragic outcome. The city around him continued its morning rhythm, unaware of how close a high-stakes confrontation had come to spiraling out of control. For the director, the day would continue, but the memory of being held at gunpoint, even for a few tense minutes, would remain vivid, a reminder of the thin line between routine and risk, and the importance of calm and clarity in every critical moment. The moment seemed to stretch on endlessly as the FBI director remained calm inside his vehicle, his mind fully engaged in the tense situation unfolding outside. Every second brought uncertainty, and yet he relied on his years of training to remain composed. He could hear the officer's voice over the radio, tense and controlled, giving instructions and requesting guidance. The director understood that even a small misstep could escalate the situation beyond anyone's control. He kept his hands clearly visible on the steering wheel, slowly moving them to demonstrate cooperation, all while speaking in a calm and steady tone. The officer continued to point his firearm, clearly uncertain about the situation. The director slowly reached toward his jacket to show his credentials again. Each movement was deliberate, cautious, and intended to avoid any misinterpretation. He spoke clearly, repeating his name, his position, and the nature of his duties. The officer hesitated, his eyes scanning the badge, trying to reconcile what he saw with the reality of the situation. His stance suggested both fear and confusion, the gun still raised, but his body language betraying his uncertainty. Nearby, people had begun to notice the incident. Some stopped in their cars, watching cautiously from a safe distance. Pedestrians froze on the sidewalks, unsure whether to continue walking or seek safety. Phones were raised as many tried to capture the unexpected and alarming encounter. The tension in the air was thick, almost tangible. The director, fully aware of the public attention, kept his focus entirely on de-escalating the situation. He knew that any visible panic or sudden movements could trigger fear in the officer and make the situation more dangerous. The officer finally spoke again, his voice controlled, but strained. He called for identification confirmation over the radio and received instructions to maintain the standoff until backup arrived. Each word from the officer was carefully chosen, a mix of authority and caution. The director responded, keeping his tone calm, explaining again that he was there to cooperate fully. He stressed that he understood the officer's duty to ensure safety and that he posed no threat. This moment of communication, precise and careful, began to slowly ease some of the tension. As the minutes passed, the director continued to observe the officer closely. He noted subtle signs of fatigue and hesitation, and he used this information to maintain a sense of calm in his own actions. He spoke softly but clearly, reinforcing his compliance and identity, ensuring that the officer would understand that he was not resisting in any way. Every movement was measured, deliberate, and transparent, designed to maintain trust and prevent any sudden escalation. Suddenly, the sound of additional sirens approached. Backup officers were arriving, their presence adding both relief and a new dynamic to the situation. The initial officer, still holding his firearm, was now slightly more cautious, realizing that the arrival of reinforcements could either resolve the situation or further complicate it. The director remained patient, understanding that the next few moments were critical. He did not make any unnecessary movements, speaking only when necessary and keeping his hands in clear view. The arrival of additional officers created a buffer between the director and the initial officer. The senior officers quickly assessed the scene, confirming the identity of the director through his badge and documents. They spoke to the officer, calmly instructing him to lower his firearm and step aside for verification. This clear chain of command and immediate presence of authority began to stabilize the situation. The director, still seated in his vehicle, maintained his composure, watching carefully as the officers handled the situation with efficiency and precision. The initial officer stepped back, lowering his weapon slightly, clearly processing the confirmation of the director's identity. He remained tense, but the urgency in his posture began to ease. The director spoke gently, thanking him for exercising caution and emphasizing the importance of safety for all parties. His words were calm and reassuring, designed to reduce fear while acknowledging the seriousness of the moment. Even as the immediate danger passed, the director remained vigilant. He understood that the initial adrenaline surge could linger in both himself and the officers around him. He continued to cooperate fully, providing information, demonstrating credentials, and allowing the backup officers to manage the scene. His calm demeanor served as an example of professional conduct under extreme stress, showing that even in frightening circumstances, controlled and thoughtful actions could prevent disaster. As the crowd of bystanders grew, some expressing concern and curiosity, the director kept his attention on the procedural steps being taken. The officers were now clearly focused on verification, communication, and ensuring that the scene remained safe. The director's cooperation made this process smoother, his calm and professional approach reducing the potential for further tension or misunderstandings. Throughout the entire encounter, the director's training in handling high-stress situations proved invaluable. He understood human behavior, the psychology of fear, and the need for clear communication. He spoke slowly, measured every gesture, and remained mindful of both the officer's perspective and his own safety. His awareness of the surroundings, the reactions of the public, and the procedural steps required for resolution allowed him to navigate the situation successfully. Finally, after what felt like an eternity but was only a matter of minutes, the initial officer fully lowered his weapon and stepped aside under the supervision of the backup officers. Verification of the director's identity was complete. The tension in the air, once palpable, began to dissipate as everyone recognized the seriousness of the situation and the professionalism with which it was being handled. The director remained composed, understanding that the event, though resolved, would have lasting implications for protocol, training, and public awareness. Even as the officers completed their assessments, the director remained reflective. The incident had been sudden, dangerous, and deeply unsettling, but it had also been a demonstration of the importance of calm, professional conduct. The public attention, though potentially distracting, highlighted the transparency and accountability required in law enforcement interactions. The director's patience and careful actions had helped prevent what could have been a tragic outcome, underscoring the value of training, experience, and human-centered communication. As the scene slowly returned to normal, the director cooperated with officers to ensure all necessary procedures were followed. He answered questions, explained the situation, and maintained a calm presence even as the initial shock began to wear off. The city around him resumed its rhythm, but for the director, the memory of being held at gunpoint, even for a short period, remained vivid. The experience would serve as a reminder of the unpredictable nature of law enforcement, the importance of patience and composure, and the value of clear communication in preventing escalation. The entire encounter, from the sudden stop to the arrival of backup and the verification of identity, had tested the director's ability to remain calm under extreme pressure. Every decision, every gesture, and every word had mattered. His professionalism had helped stabilize a potentially dangerous situation, demonstrating that even in moments of fear and uncertainty, thoughtful and deliberate actions could protect lives and maintain order. This moment, though brief, would resonate in his mind, shaping his reflections on authority, responsibility, and the unpredictable realities of public service. Once the backup officers had arrived, the atmosphere began to shift slightly. There was still tension, but the presence of more experienced personnel brought a sense of order to the situation. The FBI director, sitting calmly in his car, observed every movement. He knew that despite the arrival of additional officers, the situation was still fragile. One wrong step could reignite fear or misunderstanding, so he continued to follow every protocol meticulously. The senior officers quickly moved to assess the identity of the director. They approached with a balanced combination of authority and caution, understanding that they were dealing with one of the highest-ranking officials in federal law enforcement. The director presented his credentials again, allowing them to confirm his identity quickly and efficiently. Each movement was deliberate, precise, and meant to convey transparency and cooperation. The initial officer, who had pointed the gun moments ago, was instructed to step aside. His posture was tense, reflecting both relief and lingering anxiety. It was clear that he was processing the gravity of what had occurred. The backup officers began questioning him, focusing on his perception of the situation and why he had felt the need to escalate to the point of aiming his weapon. The director remained calm and observant, understanding that the officer's fear was natural but also that accountability was necessary. As verification continued, the director reflected on the intensity of the moment. Even for someone accustomed to high-pressure scenarios, being held at gunpoint by a fellow officer was unnerving. He reminded himself that the key to resolving the situation was patience, clear communication, and maintaining a calm demeanor. He could feel the adrenaline slowly fading, replaced by a keen awareness of the importance of every word and gesture. The senior officers, after verifying his identity, began coordinating the next steps. They established a perimeter to ensure safety and began documenting the incident thoroughly. The director cooperated fully, answering questions and providing details about the sequence of events. He explained his approach, how he had remained compliant, and how he had ensured that the officer did not feel threatened while communicating his identity. Meanwhile, The initial officer's anxiety was evident. The realization that he had pointed a gun at a high-ranking federal official weighed heavily on him. He had followed his training, but human error had played a role. The senior officers handled this delicately, balancing accountability with understanding. They asked questions about procedure, situational awareness, and training, making it clear that mistakes could not compromise safety, but also acknowledging that stress can impact judgment in intense moments. The director noticed the reactions of the bystanders as well. People had gathered at a distance, their expressions a mix of curiosity, fear, and fascination. Some had phones raised, capturing the encounter in real time. The director remained mindful that public perception was important, but his focus stayed on ensuring that the situation was fully under control. His composure provided a stabilizing influence not just for the officers but also for those watching, demonstrating that calm, thoughtful actions could de-escalate a potentially volatile situation. The officers began coordinating communication with the police department, explaining the details of the encounter, and requesting a review of the incident. The director was included in these discussions, providing input and clarifying his movements and actions. Every detail mattered, from the positioning of the car to the tone of voice used during the standoff. Documentation was thorough, aimed at ensuring that the sequence of events was clear and that lessons could be drawn to prevent future incidents. The initial officer was carefully guided through procedures for handling high-pressure stops, including proper verification of identities and protocols for engaging with unidentified individuals. The director observed this process with a focus on ensuring safety, understanding that proper training and procedural clarity could prevent similar incidents in the future. He recognized that human error was inevitable, but structured protocols could mitigate risks. While the initial officer underwent questioning, the director began to reflect on the broader implications of the incident. Being held at gunpoint by a fellow officer highlighted vulnerabilities even in highly secure, trained environments. The incident underscored the importance of clear identification, careful communication, and the need for structured response strategies when interacting with unidentified individuals. He also realized that public awareness of such incidents could foster a deeper understanding of law enforcement challenges. The senior officers completed their verification and provided reassurance to both the director and the initial officer. They emphasized that while mistakes had occurred, procedures were in place to ensure accountability and prevent escalation. The director, maintaining his professional demeanor, acknowledged this approach and cooperated fully. He answered detailed questions about his actions and provided insight into best practices for handling similar high-stakes interactions. As the situation stabilized, the director and officers began discussing the next steps. The initial officer would be taken into custody for further review, while the director would continue with his duties under protective supervision. Communication channels were established between federal and local authorities to ensure that the incident was thoroughly investigated and documented. The director, despite the intense experience, remained composed, understanding the importance of procedure, transparency, and maintaining trust among all involved parties. Throughout the entire encounter, the director's calmness and attention to detail had played a crucial role. He had remained focused, controlled, and cooperative, demonstrating professionalism even under extreme stress. His actions had helped prevent a potentially dangerous escalation and provided a model for managing high-pressure encounters. The incident would likely be studied by law enforcement agencies as an example of both the risks inherent in policing and the value of training, communication, and measured response. By the time the scene was fully under control, the director had regained his composure and reflected on the lessons learned. The initial fear and tension had transformed into a clear understanding of human behavior, procedural necessity, and the importance of remaining calm under pressure. The event would have long-term implications for training and protocols, highlighting how even small errors in judgment could have serious consequences if not addressed promptly. The public, still observing from a distance, began to disperse as the situation became clearly managed. Phones were lowered and pedestrians resumed their routines. The director, aware of the attention but focused on procedure, remained an example of professionalism, patience, and controlled response. He continued to cooperate with officers, ensuring that the documentation of the incident was complete and accurate. Every detail mattered, and he remained attentive to ensure clarity and understanding. As the director prepared to leave the scene, he reflected on the delicate balance between authority, trust, and human error. The incident had been frightening, yet it had also demonstrated the importance of professionalism, patience, and structured response. His actions had not only ensured his safety, but had also provided guidance for the officers involved and reinforced best practices in law enforcement procedures. The experience would stay with him, a reminder of the unpredictable nature of human interactions and the critical importance of composure, clear communication, and careful observation in moments of crisis. Once the initial officer was taken aside by the senior personnel, the focus shifted to immediate action to secure the scene and begin a thorough review. The FBI director remained calm inside his vehicle, aware of every movement around him. He knew that even after verification, there were still steps that needed to be carefully managed to prevent further issues. The arrival of additional officers had added control, but the process of investigation, documentation, and review had just begun. The officers quickly assessed the officer who had pointed the gun. He was taken into custody for administrative review, ensuring that he could not interfere with the ongoing investigation or pose a risk to anyone at the scene. The director observed the procedure quietly, understanding the necessity of swift but careful action. The process needed to be thorough to maintain public trust and ensure accountability. The director stepped out of his vehicle when instructed, showing full cooperation. His movements were slow, deliberate, and transparent. Officers remained nearby, guiding the process carefully. Each step was documented, photographed, and recorded to provide an accurate account of the incident. The director understood the importance of this documentation, not only for the immediate investigation but for future lessons in training and protocol development. During the review, the director explained his actions during the standoff. He detailed how he maintained a calm demeanor, kept his hands visible, and communicated clearly to the officer, emphasizing his identity and authority without threatening the officer's position. He highlighted how patience and composure could prevent escalation, even in highly stressful circumstances. His insights were carefully noted by the senior officers and investigators on site. Meanwhile, the officer who had made the mistake was questioned about his actions. He recounted what he perceived as potential threats, the reasoning behind drawing his weapon, and the factors that influenced his judgment at that moment. The discussion was serious but handled professionally. The goal was to understand what led to the error and how similar incidents could be prevented in the future. Training, procedural clarity, and situational awareness were emphasized as key factors to address. The director, despite the unsettling experience, remained focused on safety and resolution. He observed the interactions closely, ensuring that proper protocol was followed. His professionalism had been a stabilizing influence throughout the event, and now it served as a model for handling the follow-up procedures with care and attention. As the investigation proceeded, officers reviewed security footage, body camera recordings, and witness accounts. Every detail was analyzed to ensure a clear understanding of the sequence of events. The director cooperated fully, providing context and clarification where needed. His calm and methodical approach ensured that nothing was overlooked, and that the review could proceed smoothly and accurately. The initial officer, while facing consequences, was treated in accordance with established procedures. He was placed on administrative leave pending a complete internal review. The director acknowledged that mistakes can happen, especially under high-stress situations, but emphasized the importance of accountability and corrective measures. The incident served as a lesson for all involved, highlighting the need for vigilance, training, and effective communication in every law enforcement interaction. The director also met with senior law enforcement leadership to discuss broader implications. He stressed that incidents like these, while rare, could have serious consequences if not managed carefully. His recommendations included additional training on verifying identities, maintaining composure under stress, and using clear communication to avoid misunderstandings. These discussions were collaborative, focusing on safety, professionalism, and prevention. Public attention to the incident was growing. Bystanders had captured videos and shared them online, sparking discussions about police training, public safety, and accountability. The director recognized the importance of transparency. He understood that the public's perception was influenced by these events, and the way law enforcement responded could reinforce trust or cause concern. He remained composed, speaking to officers and leadership about the need to handle the matter openly, responsibly, and professionally. Throughout the review, the director reflected on the human element of law enforcement. Even trained professionals can make mistakes under stress. Fear, uncertainty, and rapid decision-making can all contribute to errors. His role was to ensure that the situation was resolved safely, while also providing insights that could prevent similar incidents in the future. He emphasized that maintaining composure, communicating clearly, and following established protocols could make the difference between safety and disaster. As the investigation continued, officers began to formalize their reports. They documented the timeline, the actions taken by the director, the responses of the initial officer, and the measures implemented to stabilize the scene. The director cooperated fully, providing detailed accounts and insights into best practices. This cooperation ensured that the investigation was thorough and accurate, providing valuable lessons for both local and federal law enforcement agencies. The director also considered the emotional impact on the officer who had pointed the gun. While accountability was necessary, understanding the psychological stress and human factors involved was equally important. Law enforcement professionals operate in high-pressure environments, and support, guidance, and training are essential to prevent errors from turning into dangerous situations. By the end of the day, the immediate threat had been neutralized, the officer in custody, and the investigation underway. The director, though shaken by the experience, remained professional, cooperative, and reflective. He understood that the incident would likely lead to policy reviews, training improvements, and procedural adjustments. The lessons learned would help ensure that similar encounters in the future could be managed safely and effectively. The city slowly returned to its normal rhythm, unaware of how close the encounter had come to escalating. The director remained focused on ensuring safety, accountability, and transparency. His calm presence had guided the situation from the initial stop to the final review, demonstrating professionalism under extreme stress. He knew that while the incident was over, the lessons from it would continue to shape policies, training, and the understanding of human behavior in law enforcement interactions. Even as he prepared to leave the scene, the director reflected on the importance of patience, clear communication, and careful observation. The experience had reinforced his belief that professionalism and composure are essential tools in law enforcement, capable of preventing potential tragedies. The incident had tested his ability to remain calm under pressure, and he had done so successfully, ensuring the safety of everyone involved and providing valuable insights for future training and policy development. The day after the incident, the FBI director took time to reflect on everything that had happened. He knew that the encounter had been intense, frightening, and unpredictable, but he also understood that it offered lessons that could help improve law enforcement practices. The experience was a reminder of the fragile line between routine and danger, and the importance of staying calm, professional, and observant in every situation. He began by reviewing the actions that had been taken by the officers and himself during the encounter. Every movement, every word, and every decision had mattered. The initial officer's reaction had been based on fear and uncertainty, while his own response had relied on training, patience, and careful communication. He reflected on how quickly situations could escalate when identification and communication fail, and how crucial it is for all law enforcement officers to have clear protocols in place. The FBI director also met with senior law enforcement officials to discuss the broader implications of the incident. He shared his perspective on what had occurred, emphasizing the importance of verification procedures and clear communication in high-stress encounters. He explained that maintaining composure, even when facing fear or misunderstanding, could prevent unnecessary escalation and potential tragedy. His insights were taken seriously, and plans were made to improve training and protocols to ensure that officers could handle similar situations more effectively in the future. He thought about the human side of the event as well. The officer who had pointed the gun had acted out of a genuine concern for safety, yet the lack of proper verification had turned a routine stop into a dangerous situation. The director understood that human error is inevitable under stress, but he also recognized the need for accountability and corrective measures. Policies and training were important, but empathy, understanding, and guidance were equally necessary to prevent mistakes from becoming harmful. The public had become aware of the incident through videos and eyewitness accounts. The director understood that transparency and communication were crucial. He spoke with media representatives in a controlled and professional manner, explaining the situation without placing blame, while stressing the importance of learning from the event. His calm, clear, and human-centered approach helped reassure the public and reinforce trust in law enforcement. Internally, the FBI director worked with teams to develop strategies for preventing similar encounters. He highlighted the importance of clear identification for high-ranking officials, proper verification procedures, and the need for officers to maintain composure under stress. Training programs were updated to include simulations of high-pressure stops, teaching officers how to recognize authority, verify credentials quickly, and de-escalate tense situations without resorting to force unnecessarily. He also considered the emotional impact on all involved. The initial officer would face consequences, but he would also need support and guidance to understand and learn from the experience. The director advocated for balanced approaches that combined accountability with training and support, ensuring that mistakes became opportunities for growth and improvement rather than sources of fear or resentment. In the weeks following the incident, the director followed up on the investigation and the internal review. He reviewed reports, spoke with investigators, and ensured that every detail had been documented accurately. His involvement helped guarantee that lessons were captured, policies were updated, and procedures were strengthened to prevent future incidents. He remained focused on safety, accountability, and the broader goal of improving law enforcement practices nationwide. The director also used the experience to mentor others. He spoke to teams about the importance of situational awareness, patience, and calm communication. He shared his own perspective on handling fear, making measured decisions, and maintaining professionalism under pressure. His reflections became a teaching tool, showing that even high-ranking officials must rely on training, preparation, and human judgment to navigate unpredictable situations. As time passed, the public and law enforcement agencies recognized the incident as a learning moment. Training programs were improved, communication protocols were clarified, and officers were encouraged to approach stops with caution and empathy. The director's calm and professional response became an example for others, highlighting the value of composure, careful observation, and effective communication in preventing dangerous misunderstandings. The FBI director reflected on how quickly ordinary situations could turn into extraordinary challenges. A routine drive, a brief encounter with an officer, and a misunderstanding could escalate into a life-threatening scenario. He understood that the responsibility of law enforcement is immense, and the need for professionalism, patience, and clarity is constant. Every interaction, no matter how routine, carries potential risks, and how one responds can determine safety or disaster. He also considered the broader societal implications. Public trust in law enforcement depends on both accountability and transparency. Incidents like these, when handled correctly, can reinforce trust, demonstrate professionalism, and provide opportunities for improvement. The director's calm and methodical response not only ensured his own safety, but also set a precedent for how high-stakes encounters should be managed. Ultimately, the incident reinforced the value of human-centered approaches in law enforcement. The director's ability to remain calm, communicate clearly, and act with patience and professionalism had prevented a tragedy. His reflection on the human, procedural, and systemic elements of the encounter informed future training, policy development, and mentorship. He understood that law enforcement is as much about understanding people, emotions, and communication as it is about rules, authority, and procedures. In the end, the FBI director emerged from the experience with a strengthened commitment to safety, professionalism, and leadership. He continued his work, carrying the lessons of that day with him, ensuring that both federal and local law enforcement could learn from the event. The story served as a powerful reminder that in moments of fear and uncertainty, calm human-centered actions, clear communication, and careful observation can prevent danger, save lives, and guide others toward better practices. The memory of that day remained with him, shaping his approach to leadership, law enforcement, and the delicate balance between authority, trust, and human error.